The fluorescent lights of the estate attorney's office hummed with the indifference of a Tuesday afternoon. Margot Chen sat in the uncomfortable leather chair, her fingers worrying the worn strap of her purse, while her siblings shuffled papers and whispered to each other across the mahogany conference table. At 32, Margot had become invisible to her family. The unmarried daughter who never quite launched, who worked double shifts at Sacred Heart Hospital as a nurse's aide, who lived in a studio apartment in the unfashionable part of San Francisco because it was all she could afford. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Her brother David, 40, sat with the posture of a man who owned 3 car dealerships and never let anyone forget it. Her sister Jessica, 37, checked her phone constantly, diamond tennis bracelet catching the light with each impatient gesture. Their grandmother, Helen Chen, had passed 3 weeks earlier at the age of 94. The woman who had raised Margot after her mother died, who had taught her to find beauty in small things, who had filled their small Chinatown apartment with the rhythmic sound of her ancient Singer sewing machine working late into the night. Mr. Wallace, the estate attorney, cleared his throat with the practiced efficiency of someone who presided over countless family divisions. The distribution of Helen Chen's estate is relatively straightforward to David Chen. The property at 2247 Stockton Street, currently valued at approximately $1.8 million. David nodded with satisfaction. The Chinatown building their grandmother had purchased decades ago for almost nothing, now worth a fortune in San Francisco's impossible real estate market. Jessica would receive the investment portfolio, Mr. Wallace continued, consisting primarily of municipal bonds and blue-chip stocks valued at approximately $340,000. Jessica's smile was tight, calculating. She'd probably expected more, and to Margot Chen, Mr. Wallace paused, consulting his notes with what might have been sympathy. The contents of the sewing room, including all fabric materials and the 1952 Singer sewing machine. The silence that followed was broken by David's short laugh. The sewing machine? That old thing probably weighs 200 pounds and doesn't even work anymore. Jessica didn't bother hiding her smirk. Grandmother always did have a soft spot for lost causes. The words stung precisely because they were intended to. Margot had heard variations of this sentiment her entire adult life. The daughter who chose nursing over law school, who sent money to their grandmother instead of saving for her own future, who had somehow failed to transform herself into the kind of success story her siblings could brag about at cocktail parties. Mr. Wallace shifted uncomfortably. There is one additional note here. Helen specifically requested that Margot not dispose of the sewing machine without thoroughly examining it first. She emphasized this point quite strongly in our final meeting. Something about it flickered across Margot's memory. Her grandmother's hands gnarled with arthritis, gripping hers with unexpected strength 3 months ago. Promise me, Margot. Promise you'll keep the machine. Don't let them throw it away. Look carefully. Everything you need is there. At the time, Margot had dismissed it as the confusion of age, the sentimentality of a woman facing mortality. Now, sitting in the attorney's office with her siblings' contempt thick in the air, she wondered if there had been something more. The meeting concluded with cold efficiency. David and Jessica left together, already discussing the property sale timeline and investment liquidation strategies. Margot remained behind, staring at the single page listing her inheritance, 1 sewing machine and boxes of fabric remnants. Mr. Wallace approached her gently. Your grandmother was quite insistent about that machine. She mentioned it every time we spoke in her final months. Margot looked up, searching his weathered face for meaning. Did she say why? He shook his head slowly, only that you would understand when the time was right. She trusted you, Miss Chen. That was evident in every conversation. The words settled over Margot like a thin blanket, insufficient against the cold, but offering what comfort they could. Her grandmother had trusted her. In a family that dismissed her as a failure, Helen had chosen her for something, even if that something was just an old sewing machine. The following Saturday, Margot borrowed a friend's truck to collect her inheritance. The Chinatown apartment building, where her grandmother had lived for 40 years, stood narrow and weathered between a dim sum restaurant and a shop selling Chinese herbs. David had already changed the locks, but he'd left the sewing room untouched. Probably too valuable to bother with what he considered junk. The super let her in with apologetic eyes. Your grandmother was a good lady, always paid rent on time, never complained. He hesitated at the doorway of the sewing room. She spent a lot of time in here, especially toward the end. Sometimes I'd hear that old machine running at 2, 3 in the morning. Margot stepped into the room and was immediately transported back 20 years. The space hadn't changed. Time preserved in yellowing fabric and the particular scent of thread and machine oil. The Singer sewing machine dominated the room, a black and gold monument to another era, positioned beneath the window, where afternoon light had always been strongest, but it was the walls that stopped her breath. Every surface was covered with her grandmother's work, evening gowns that had clothed Chinatown brides through 5 decades. Children's outfits in bright silk, the traditional Chong Sam dresses that had been Helen's specialty. Each piece represented hours of painstaking labor, artistry rendered in fabric and thread. And there in the corner was Margot's own history, the dress her grandmother had made for her 8th grade graduation, the jacket she'd worn to her mother's funeral, the quilt that had covered her bed through high school, each square containing a memory Helen had thought worth preserving. Margot sank onto the worn stool, emotion overwhelming her carefully maintained composure. Her grandmother had been an artist, though no one had ever called her that. She'd been an immigrant seamstress who worked for wealthy clients and saved every penny, who never complained about her circumstances, who created beauty with nothing but fabric and determination. The sewing machine sat silent, waiting. It was indeed massive. The cast iron base alone probably weighing 50 pounds. The black enamel finish was chipped in places, revealing the metal beneath. Gold detailing, once bright, had faded to a dull gleam. The wooden cabinet it sat in was scarred with decades of use. Margot approached it like a shrine, running her fingers over the cold metal. Her grandmother's hands had touched these same surfaces countless times. The wheel that drove the needle, the tension dial, the foot pedal worn smooth by constant pressure. She tried the wheel experimentally. It turned with surprising ease, the mechanism still sound despite its age. The needle moved up and down in its precise rhythm, ready to work if asked. Whatever else might be said about Helen Chen, she had maintained her tools with meticulous care. It took 2 hours to carefully pack the fabric and materials into boxes. Margot found herself unable to discard anything, even scraps that seemed useless. Each piece had been selected by her grandmother for a reason, part of some design or possibility. Finally, only the machine remained. Moving it would require help. Margot called her friend Marcus, who arrived an hour later with skepticism and a dolly. "This is your inheritance?" he asked, eyeing the singer dubiously. "Your siblings got real estate and stocks, and you got a sewing machine that probably belongs in a museum?" Margot felt defensive heat rise in her chest. "It meant something to my grandmother. That makes it valuable to me." Marcus raised his hands in surrender. "Hey, I'm not judging. I'm just saying that thing weighs a ton, and your studio apartment is on the 3rd floor with no elevator." They managed to maneuver the machine onto the dolly and carefully down the stairs. Every step, a calculated risk of disaster on the street. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Passers-by stared at the strange procession. A young woman and her friend struggling with a massive antique sewing machine, loading it into a pickup truck with infinite care. The machine barely fit in Margot's studio apartment. They positioned it beneath her single window, the only spot with adequate light. Marcus departed with promises to help if she ever decided to move it again, leaving Margot alone with her inheritance. She ordered takeout and sat on her bed, staring at the singer in the fading afternoon light. The machine dominated the small space, its presence overwhelming. Around it, she'd stacked the boxes of fabric, creating a claustrophobic maze of her grandmother's legacy. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Heard you actually took that old machine. Hope you have room in your shoebox apartment. Lol." The casual cruelty was expected, but still stung. Margot set her phone aside and approached the singer again. In the evening light, it looked different, less like a relic and more like a puzzle waiting to be solved. She remembered her grandmother's urgent grip, her cryptic words. "Look carefully. Everything you need is there." Margot began examining the machine more closely, running her hands over every surface, opening each small drawer in the wooden cabinet, thread spools, spare needles, bobbins, all the expected contents of a working seamstress's station. But nothing unusual, nothing that explained her grandmother's insistence. Frustration mounted as Margot searched. She checked the drawers again, removed each item, felt for hidden compartments. Nothing. The machine was exactly what it appeared to be. An old singer in good condition, functional, but unremarkable. Maybe there was no mystery. Maybe her grandmother's final words had simply been the sentiment of an old woman wanting her granddaughter to appreciate her craft. Margot felt foolish for expecting more. Exhausted from the day's physical labor and emotional weight, Margot prepared for bed. She had an early shift at the hospital tomorrow. Another 14 hours of patient care that would leave her too tired to think about sewing machines or inheritance disappointments. But sleep wouldn't come. She lay in the darkness, staring at the singer's silhouette against the window. The streetlight outside cast shadows that made the machine look almost alive. Waiting at 2 in the morning, unable to resist the pull any longer, Margot got up and turned on every light in the apartment. If there was something to find, she would find it now, even if it meant taking the entire machine apart. She started with the wooden cabinet base, removing each drawer completely, examining the construction for hidden compartments. Victorian furniture often contained secret spaces. Perhaps a sewing machine cabinet might too. The wood was solid oak, beautifully joined, but revealing nothing unusual. Next, she examined the cast iron base itself, running her fingers over every surface, pressing, probing, searching for any seam or joint that might indicate an opening. The metal remained stubbornly solid, unyielding to her investigation. Hours passed. Dawn approached. Margot's frustration transformed into something approaching desperation. Her grandmother wouldn't have lied. There had to be something. She was about to give up when her hand brushed against the underside of the cabinet base. Something felt wrong, a slight irregularity in what should have been smooth wood. Moreau got on her knees, contorting herself to look underneath the cabinet. There, barely visible in the shadows, was a seam, not part of the original construction, but added later, a panel that had been carefully fitted to match the surrounding wood. Her heart began to race. With trembling fingers, she pressed along the seam, searching for a release mechanism. Nothing. She tried pulling, then pushing. Still nothing. Think, Margot. Her grandmother had arthritis in her final years. Whatever mechanism opened, this would need to be simple, accessible. She felt along the panel's edges again, this time more slowly. There in the right corner, a small wooden peg that could be pressed. When she pushed it, something clicked softly. The panel dropped down on hidden hinges, revealing a space about 8 in deep. And in that space, stacked with military precision, were bundles of cash. United States currency in neat packs, each secured with paper bands. Margot froze, unable to process what she was seeing. Her hands shook as she reached for the first bundle, $100 bills, 50 of them bound together, $5, zeroed in a single stack. She pulled out another bundle, the same, and another. Her tiny apartment floor became covered with money as she emptied the hidden compartment. When the space was finally empty, Margot sat surrounded by more cash than she had ever seen outside of a bank vault. With shaking hands, she began to count. Each bundle contained $5. There were dozens of bundles. The counting took over an hour, interrupted repeatedly by her disbelief, by the need to verify that this was real. When she finished, the total made her dizzy. $221 million. The number was impossible, absurd. Her grandmother, the immigrant seamstress, who had worked 14-hour days and lived in a modest Chinatown apartment, had hidden $221 million in a sewing machine cabinet. Margot's first coherent thought was that it must be fake, some elaborate prank or mistake. But the bills felt right, looked right. The serial numbers were sequential but varied. The paper had the distinctive texture of genuine currency. Dawn light now filled the apartment, illuminating the money scattered across every surface. Margot sat in the center of it all, her mind racing through impossible questions. Where had this come from? How had her grandmother acquired such an enormous sum? Why hide it in a sewing machine instead of a bank? And most urgently, what was she supposed to do now? Her phone showed 6:30 a.m. Her shift at Sacred Heart started at 7. The absurdity of the situation struck her, surrounded by a fortune, while worrying about missing work that paid $12 an hour. But the habit of responsibility was too ingrained. She couldn't simply not show up. With hands that still trembled, Margot began gathering the money, returning it to the hidden compartment. The bundles fit precisely, as though the space had been designed exactly for this amount. When everything was secured and the panel closed, the singer looked innocent again, just an old sewing machine inherited by the disappointing granddaughter. Moreau dressed for work in a daze, her movements automatic. On the bus to the hospital, she caught her reflection in the window. She looked exactly as she had yesterday, tired, rumpled, ordinary. No one could possibly guess that she had just discovered a fortune hidden in her grandmother's sewing machine. The shift at Sacred Heart passed in a blur of patient care and paperwork. Margot moved through her duties mechanically, her mind elsewhere. During her lunch break, she sat in the hospital cafeteria, unable to eat, staring at nothing. "You okay?" Marcus appeared with his own lunch tray, concern evident in his expression. "You look like you've seen a ghost." The urge to tell him was overwhelming. Marcus had been her friend since nursing school, one of the few people in her life who treated her with genuine respect. But the words stuck in her throat. How could she explain what words could possibly convey what she'd discovered? "I'm fine," she lied. "Just tired. Didn't sleep well." Marcus studied her for a moment, clearly unconvinced. "If you need anything, you know I'm here, right? Whatever's going on, you don't have to handle it alone." The kindness nearly broke through her, carefully maintained composure. Margot nodded, not trusting her voice. After Marcus left, she pulled out her phone and began searching for information. Where does a seamstress get $221 million? The question seemed absurd, even formulating it. She searched for her grandmother's name, finding only a brief obituary and a few mentions in Chinatown community records. Helen Chen, seamstress, immigrant from Hong Kong in 1965, survived by 3 grandchildren. Nothing suggested wealth. Nothing hinted at secrets. Margot's mind churned with possibilities, each more improbable than the last. Maybe her grandmother had won the lottery and hidden the winnings. Maybe she'd been saving meticulously for decades. Maybe there was family money from Hong Kong that no one knew about. Or maybe the thought sent ice through her veins. Maybe the money wasn't legitimate. Maybe her grandmother had been involved in something criminal. The idea seemed incompatible with the woman Moreau had known. Helen Chen had been devoutly honest, almost fanatically so. She returned extra change when cashiers made mistakes. She reported every penny of income on her taxes. But people were complicated, and $221 million suggested complications that Margot couldn't begin to imagine. The rest of her shift passed in anxious distraction. By the time she boarded the bus home, exhaustion and stress had combined into a physical ache. She needed advice, guidance, but who could she possibly trust with this information? The apartment greeted her with artificial normalcy. The singer sat beneath the window, innocent and patient. Moreau dropped her bag and approached it slowly, half convinced she'd imagined everything. But when she pressed the hidden release, the panel dropped open to reveal the stacks of currency exactly as she'd left them. It was real, all of it. Margot pulled out her laptop and began researching more systematically. She searched for large sums of missing money in San Francisco. Cases of theft or embezzlement, mysterious disappearances of fortunes, nothing matched. She tried searching her grandmother's name with various crime-related terms. Still nothing. Hours passed in fruitless investigation. As evening approached, Margot was no closer to understanding the money's origin. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. Heard from the realtor, property should sell within 30 days. My lawyer says we can contest grandmother's will if you want your fair share. The offer was transparently insincere. David wanted her to decline so he could keep the entire property value. The money had never been fairly distributed, but no one had expected Margot to complain. She was the family failure, grateful for whatever scraps she received. Looking at the fortune hidden in her sewing machine, Margot felt a surge of something she'd rarely experienced. Power. She didn't need to contest the will. She didn't need anything from David or Jessica. But they didn't know that. No one knew that. For now, at least the secret was hers alone. She texted back simply, "No need. I'm happy with what grandmother left me." The response was immediate. Lol. Okay, enjoy your sewing machine. Margot set the phone aside and stared at the singer. Whatever her grandmother had intended, whatever story lay behind this fortune, it had been entrusted to Margot specifically. Not David with his car dealerships and his condescension. Not Jessica with her investment banker husband and her casual cruelty. Her, the granddaughter who had stayed close, who had visited every week, who had held Helen's hand through her final illness. That realization brought clarity through the confusion. Whether the money was legitimate or not, whether it was $1 or $21 million, her grandmother had chosen to give it to Margot. There had to be a reason. As night fell over San Francisco, Margot began examining the hidden compartment. More carefully, perhaps there was something else, some explanation or instruction. The space was empty of everything except currency. But as her hands explored the wood, she felt another irregularity, a small envelope taped to the underside of the panel itself. With careful fingers, Margot peeled away the tape and extracted the envelope. It was yellowed with age, sealed with red wax, bearing her grandmother's seal. Margot's hands trembled as she broke the seal and pulled out several pages of her grandmother's distinctive handwriting. "My dearest Marrow," the letter began, "if you are reading this, I am gone, and you have found what I left for you. I pray you will not judge me too harshly for the secrets I kept, and I hope you will understand the choices I made. Money you have found is rightfully yours. It came to me through means that were unusual but entirely legitimate. I never spent it because I was afraid. Afraid of questions, of attention, of disturbing the quiet life I had built. But you deserve to know the truth. In 1989, I was hired to alter a wedding dress for a woman named Sarah Mitchell. She was kind, warm, and impossibly generous. She was also, as I learned later, the daughter of Henry Mitchell, who had recently passed away. Henry Mitchell was a real estate developer who had made his fortune in San Francisco's boom years. His daughter was his only heir. Sarah came to me weekly for fittings. We became friends. Despite our different worlds, Zolt, she confided that her father's fortune had been built on luck. A single investment in what became Silicon Valley that had multiplied beyond anyone's expectations. She also confided her fear. The money felt like a burden. It attracted the wrong people, created dangerous situations. After her wedding, Sarah disappeared. The news called it a kidnapping, though no ransom was ever demanded. The police investigated but found nothing. The case eventually went cold. 3 years later, Sarah appeared at my door. She was thinner, harder, but alive. She'd staged her own disappearance. She explained to escape the money's curse. She'd been living overseas, working as a teacher, finally free. But she needed help. She couldn't access her fortune without revealing herself. Banks, lawyers, and accountants all knew her identity. Any movement of the money would expose her location. She asked if I would help her hide it, keep it safe, then someday pass it to someone who would use it wisely. I didn't understand why she chose me, but Sarah insisted that I was trustworthy, that my quiet life and honest reputation made me the perfect guardian. She arranged the transfer carefully, legally through a series of trusts and shell companies that eventually converted the assets to cash, untraceable and portable. The entire sum came to $221 million. She asked me to keep it hidden until the time was right, then give it to someone with a good heart who would do good things with it. I chose you, Margot, because among my grandchildren, you alone understood that wealth isn't money. You stayed close, not for inheritance, but for love. You chose a helping profession instead of a lucrative one. You give more than you have to give. Sarah told me once that money amplifies what's already in a person's heart. Someone kind becomes more generous, someone cruel becomes more dangerous. I trust your heart, my dear girl. Use this money to amplify the goodness I've always seen in you. There are no conditions, no restrictions. It is yours completely and legally. All documentation is in a safety deposit box at Westwood Bank on Grant Avenue. The key is taped to the back of the photograph of your mother that hung in my sewing room. The bank manager, Mr. James Liu, knows to expect you. Everything is prepared. Live the life you deserve. Help others as you've always done. And please try not to think too harshly of your old grandmother for keeping such secrets. I wanted to tell you many times, but feared the burden would be too heavy while I was still here to share it. I love you more than words can express. You were the light of my late years. Whatever you choose to do with this gift, I will be proud. Your devoted grandmother, Helen Chen. Margot read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. The impossible had an explanation. The fortune wasn't stolen or criminal. It was an act of trust between 2 women who understood that sometimes the greatest freedom comes from disappearing. She thought about Sarah Mitchell, about a woman so desperate to escape her inheritance that she'd staged her own kidnapping, about her grandmother living simply while guarding a fortune for 30 years, about the trust placed in Margot before she'd even known it existed. The sun rose on her second day of knowing about the money. Margot hadn't slept. She'd spent the night reading her grandmother's letter repeatedly, processing information that rewrote her entire understanding of Helen Chen's life. At 8 a.m. She called the hospital. This is Margot Chen. I need to request an emergency leave of absence. 2 weeks to start. There was surprise on the other end. Margot never missed shifts. Never asked for time off. Family matters, she explained, which was true enough. When she ended the call, the liberation felt dizzying. She didn't have to report to Sacred Heart today or any day unless she chose to. The realization hadn't fully solidified yet, but its weight pressed against her consciousness. Her first stop was Westwood Bank on Grant Avenue. The building was modest, tucked between a tea shop and a produce market. Inside, the air smelled faintly of jasmine, and Chinese calendar prints decorated the walls alongside standard banking posters. Moreau approached the main desk. I need to speak with Mr. James Liu. It's regarding Helen Chen's account. The receptionist's expression shifted to recognition at the name. 1 moment, please. Mr. Liu appeared minutes later, a dignified man in his 60s with silver-rimmed glasses. Miss Chen, he bowed slightly. I've been expecting you. Please follow me. They entered a private office where Liu closed the door and offered her tea from a steaming pot already prepared. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman. She made very specific arrangements for this meeting from a desk drawer. He withdrew a folder thick with documents. Everything is in order. The trusts, the company structures, the transfers, all completely legitimate and properly documented. The money exists in cash because your grandmother preferred it that way. But I have papers here that show the entire chain of custody from the original Mitchell estate to your possession. Margot scanned the documents, seeing lawyers' names and dates spanning 3 decades. It's really legal. All of it? Absolutely. Sarah Mitchell established several trusts before her disappearance. These trusts legally converted and transferred the assets over time. Your grandmother was named as the final trustee with authority to designate the ultimate beneficiary. That's you. Leo handed her a key and a card with a number. This is for the safety deposit box. Inside, you'll find additional documentation and personal letters from both your grandmother and Miss Mitchell. He paused, studying her with kind eyes. May I offer some advice, Miss Chen? Margot nodded. Overwhelmed by the formality and precision of it all, wealth of this magnitude attracts attention. I suggest you move carefully. Consult with trustworthy financial and legal advisors before making any major decisions. Your grandmother specifically recommended my nephew David Liu, who practices estate law in Pacific Heights. He's prepared to help you if you wish. The older man withdrew a business card. Whether you use his services or not, please remember that sudden wealth changes people's perception of you. Some changes will be welcome, others will be painful. Margot left the bank with the safety deposit box key and her head spinning with implications. She needed advice, but who could she trust? The family lawyer answer seemed sensible, but she wanted to verify the information independently first. She spent the afternoon in the public library researching Sarah Mitchell's disappearance. The newspaper archives from 989 told a story she vaguely remembered from childhood. A young heiress vanished after her wedding, her abandoned car found near Golden Gate Bridge. Foul play suspected but never proven. The case had generated enormous media attention initially, then faded as months passed without resolution. The library's online databases showed that Sarah Mitchell was still officially listed as missing, though most coverage assumed she was dead. Margot found her father Henry Mitchell's obituary from 1988, a real estate developer whose single investment in early Silicon Valley companies had generated unexpected billions. His daughter Sarah had inherited everything. The timeline matched her grandmother's letter precisely. As afternoon became evening, Margot sat in the library's reading room and tried to organize her thoughts. She had a fortune. She had documentation proving it was legal. She had her grandmother's blessing to use it as she saw fit. But she also had siblings who would react with fury when they learned what she'd been given. And she had her own fear, uncertainty about how to handle money she could barely comprehend. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Did you already get rid of that sewing machine? I have a friend who collects antiques. Might be worth a couple hundred to the right buyer." The casual dismissal crystallized Margot's decision. She wouldn't tell them. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Let David and Jessica believe she'd inherited nothing of value. Let them sell the property and split the stocks and continue thinking of her as the family failure. She had something more valuable than their approval now, and she had choices. The next morning, Margot visited the safety deposit box. Inside was a metal box containing additional documents, more letters from her grandmother, and a sealed envelope marked for Margot from Sarah Mitchell. With trembling hands, Margot opened Sarah's letter. "Dear Margot, though we've never met, I feel I know you through Helen's stories. Your grandmother spoke of you constantly, always with such pride. I wanted to explain directly why I chose this unusual path. My father's fortune destroyed my life long before I inherited it. I grew up surrounded by people who valued me only for my wealth. Every friend, every romantic interest, every opportunity was tainted by the knowledge that people saw dollar signs instead of Sarah. When my father died and I inherited everything, it became unbearable. I couldn't trust anyone's motives. I couldn't live normally. I was a target, a commodity, not a person. So I disappeared. It took years of planning. But I finally achieved what money usually can't buy: freedom. I've lived under different names in different countries, teaching English to children, working in orphanages, finally experiencing life without the burden of wealth. But I couldn't simply abandon the fortune. That felt irresponsible. So, I entrusted it to Helen with instructions to find someone worthy. She chose you from everything she told me. You're someone who understands that life's value isn't measured in dollars. Use this money to amplify the good you already do. Help others live fully. Create the kind of change that wealth makes possible when it's in the right hands. I don't know where I'll be when you read this. I've learned that true freedom means letting go of even the need to be found. But I'm grateful knowing that the burden I carried is now an opportunity for you. Wishing you everything good, Sarah." The letter left Margot with tears on her cheeks and a sense of awesome responsibility. 2 women had trusted her with this fortune. One had guarded it for 30 years. The other had given up everything to escape it. She couldn't let them down. Over the following days, Margot began the delicate work of transforming her life. She met with David Liu, the estate attorney Mr. Liu had recommended. The younger Liu listened to her story without judgment, examined the documentation with professional thoroughness, and confirmed everything was legitimate and properly structured. "We need to establish proper management for assets of this size," he explained. "Trusts, investments, charitable foundations if you're interested, but we can move slowly." There's no urgency. Margot appreciated his measured approach. She authorized him to begin setting up appropriate structures while she decided what she actually wanted to do with the money. The question consumed her thoughts. What did she want? The simplest answer would be to quit her job, buy a house, live comfortably. But that felt insufficient, selfish somehow. Her grandmother and Sarah Mitchell hadn't preserved this fortune for decades, just so Margot could buy a bigger apartment. She began researching causes that mattered to her: healthcare access, nursing education, support for low-income families. The problems were enormous, the needs infinite. How could one person with one fortune address even a fraction of it? A week after discovering the money, Margot's phone rang with an unknown number. "Miss Chen, this is Dr. Patricia Warner from Sacred Heart Hospital. We need to discuss your leave of absence." Margot's stomach tightened. "I submitted the proper paperwork. I understand, and normally that would be fine. But there's been a development. One of our major donors is threatening to withdraw funding because of, how shall I put this, Some gossip about staff members. Apparently, your sister Jessica mentioned to someone that your grandmother's estate involved irregularities. The person she mentioned it to sits on our hospital board. Cold fury swept through Margot. Jessica hadn't been able to resist gossiping, probably framing it as concern while really just exercising her talent for casual's destruction. What kind of irregularities? Dr. Warner sounded uncomfortable. The details are vague. Something about unexplained wealth and possible fraud. I don't believe it myself, but the board is demanding an explanation before they'll approve your return from leave. Margot made a decision in that instant. Dr. Warner, I'll make this simple. I'm resigning effective immediately. There was shocked silence. Miss Chen, that's not necessary. We can sort this out. I'm sure once you explain no, Margot interrupted gently. It's fine, I've decided to pursue other opportunities. My resignation letter will be on your desk tomorrow. She ended the call and sat in the silence of her apartment. The Singer sewing machine sat in its usual place. The keeper of secrets that had changed everything. Her phone buzzed almost immediately. Jessica calling Marotte, let it go to voicemail. Then David called, also ignored. They were circling now, vultures. Sensing something was wrong with the narrative they'd constructed about their disappointing sister. Marot turned off her phone and made a list. Things that needed to happen now that she'd been forced to act sooner than planned. First, move the money somewhere safer than her apartment. Second, finalize the legal structures David Liu had proposed. Third, make her first significant decision about how to use the fortune. And fourth, decide whether to tell her siblings anything at all. The money was legally hers. She owed them no explanation, but family was complicated, and secrets had consequences. That evening, Margot carefully packed the money into reinforced luggage she'd purchased specifically for the purpose. David Liu had arranged for a secure storage facility where it would be held temporarily while they established more permanent banking solutions. Moving $221 million in cash through San Francisco in a series of Uber rides was surreal, but Margot completed the task methodically over 2 days. When the last bundle was secured, she stood in her apartment looking at the Singer sewing machine, now empty of its secret cargo. It looked like what it had always appeared to be, just an old sewing machine, beautiful but unremarkable. Yet, it had held a fortune and the trust of 2 remarkable women. On the 3rd day after her resignation, Margot's phone showed 42 missed calls from her siblings. She finally answered Jessica's next call. "Where the hell have you been?" Jessica's voice was sharp with frustrated concern. "David and I have been trying to reach you for days." "I've been busy," Margot said calmly. "What do you need? Don't you dare use that tone with me." Jessica's anger was palpable even through the phone. "I've been hearing things about grandmother's estate, about money." Margot's heart rate increased, but she kept her voice steady. "What kind of things?" "You know exactly what kind of things." Jessica's voice dropped to something colder. "Did grandmother have money she didn't tell us about? Did you find something in that sewing room?" The accusation hung between them. Moreau considered her options. Lie and maintain the secret. Tell the truth and face the inevitable explosion. Or take a third path. "Jessica, grandmother left me what she wanted me to have, just like she left you and David what she wanted you to have. The distribution was exactly as she intended. That's not an answer and you know it." Jessica's frustration was building. David's lawyer is talking about investigating the estate for hidden assets. "Let him," Margot said with a confidence she was still learning to feel. Everything was properly documented and legally distributed. If David wants to waste money on lawyers, that's his choice. The call ended with Jessica's threat that this conversation wasn't finished. Margot sat in the silence afterward, realizing a bridge had been crossed. There was no going back to being invisible. Now that afternoon, she met with David Liu to discuss establishing a charitable foundation. "I want to focus on healthcare access," she explained, "particularly for underserved communities, nursing scholarships, support for elder care, the things grandmother would have cared about." Liu nodded approvingly. "A foundation provides excellent tax benefits and allows you to make sustained impact. We can start with a significant initial grant, then build from there." "How much were you thinking to start?" Margot took a breath. $10 million. The attorney's composure slipped for just a moment before professional training reasserted itself. "That's a very substantial founding grant. It will make immediate impact and attract significant attention. Are you prepared for that?" The question was valid. $10 million would generate publicity. Questions? Scrutiny. Her quiet life would end the moment news broke. But staying invisible meant the money had no purpose. It would just sit hoarded and useless when it could be changing lives. "I'm prepared," Margot said with more certainty than she felt. "Let's call it the Helen Chen Foundation in honor of my grandmother." Over the following weeks, the machinery of wealth began turning. David Liu assembled a team of lawyers, accountants, and financial advisors. The foundation paperwork was filed. Investments were structured slowly, methodically. Margot's fortune was transformed from piles of cash into a managed estate that could sustain itself and grow. The foundation's announcement generated exactly the attention Lou had predicted. Local news covered the story. Nursing groups reached out with gratitude. Hospitals called about potential partnerships, and Margot's siblings called with fury. David showed up at her apartment, unannounced, pushing past her when she opened the door. "Where the hell did you get $10 million? His face was red with anger and confusion. Grandmother was a seamstress. There's no way she had that kind of money. Margot remained calm, having prepared for this confrontation. Grandmother made wise investments over many years. She chose to leave that particular asset to me. Her choice, her money. You're lying." David stepped closer, trying to intimidate with his size. "Jessica and I already talked to the estate lawyer. There was no mention of investments worth millions." "That's because it wasn't part of the estate," Margot explained patiently. "It was a separate trust established years ago with me as the beneficiary. Completely legal and properly documented. If you don't believe me, feel free to have your lawyer investigate." David stared at her, clearly struggling to reconcile this confident woman with the passive sister he'd always dismissed. "This is wrong. You're stealing from the family. She left you a building worth almost $2 million, Margot pointed out, and Jessica got hundreds of thousands in stocks. Grandmother was generous to all of us. She just had different gifts for each. The conversation deteriorated into threats and accusations before David finally left, promising legal action that Margot knew would go nowhere. The documentation was airtight. Helen Chen had every right to distribute her assets as she chose. Jessica's approach was different. She arrived the next day with tears and hugs, suddenly playing the close sister she'd never been. "Margot, I'm so happy for you. This is amazing." The manipulation was transparent, but Margot allowed the visit, curious how far Jessica would push. As they sat in the cramped apartment, Jessica's eyes kept straying to the Singer sewing machine. "Is that where you found it? In the sewing machine?" Margot smiled without confirming. "Grandmother was very particular about that machine. She wanted me to have it specifically. The foundation is just the beginning." Jessica tried a different angle. "You'll need help managing everything. I know investment bankers, wealth managers, people who can really make that money grow." "I'm well represented already," Margot said gently. "But thank you for the offer." Jessica's facade cracked slightly. "You can't seriously be doing this alone. You don't know anything about wealth management. You're a nurse's aide." "Was," Marot corrected. "I resigned. I'm focusing on the foundation now." The correction seemed to physically pain Jessica, as if Margot's transformation was a personal insult. "Look," she tried once more. "Whatever grandmother left you, we can contest it. David's already talking to lawyers, but if you agree to share it fairly with us, we can avoid all that ugliness. Family shouldn't fight over money." Margot stood, signaling the visit's end. "You're absolutely right. Family shouldn't fight over money. That's why I'm not going to engage with any attempts to contest grandmother's clear wishes. She chose her distribution carefully. We should respect that." After Jessica left with promises this wasn't over, Margot sat by the window and watched the street below. She'd known this would be hard, but the reality of her siblings' greed still stung. 3 months after discovering the money, the Helen Chen Foundation announced its first major grant, $5 million, to establish a nursing scholarship program for students from low-income backgrounds. The announcement made national news. Healthcare advocates praised the initiative. Nursing schools called expressing gratitude, and Margot found herself the center of attention she'd never sought. The media wanted interviews. Her story, Poor Nurse's Aide Inherits Fortune from Seamstress Grandmother and immediately starts giving it away, was irresistible. Margot declined most requests, but agreed to one interview with a local Asian American newspaper. In her small apartment, with the Singer sewing machine visible in the background, she explained her grandmother's legacy without revealing the full truth. "My grandmother understood that wealth isn't for hoarding," Margot said to the reporter. "She wanted to help people. This foundation is honoring her wishes." The reporter noted the sewing machine. "Is that the famous Singer? I heard that's what you inherited instead of the property." Margot smiled with genuine affection. "Grandmother knew I would appreciate her sewing machine more than real estate. She was right. It's priceless to me." The article ran with a photograph of Margot standing beside the Singer, and the image went viral on Asian American social media. A woman honoring her immigrant grandmother by using an unexpected inheritance to help others. The narrative was inspiring, partly because it was true. Margot's phone exploded with messages from people she hadn't heard from in years. Old friends from nursing school, high school classmates, distant relatives. Everyone suddenly wanted to connect, to congratulate, to mention their own worthy causes or financial needs. Marcus was one of the few who called without an agenda. "I don't know how you did this," he said over coffee at their usual cafe, "but I'm so proud of you. I always knew you were special." Margot blinked back tears at his simple, genuine support. "Grandmother taught me well. She prepared me for this, even though I didn't know it at the time. Are your siblings being awful? Marcus knew her family dynamics well. Marrow laughed without humor. That's a mild way to put it. David filed a legal challenge to the estate. It was dismissed immediately, but he tried. Jessica keeps sending emotional emails about family and loyalty. They'll come around, Marcus said optimistically. Or they won't. But you're doing something incredible. Don't let them diminish that. The foundation's work expanded over the following months. In addition to nursing scholarships, Margot funded a free clinic in the Tenderloin district, established an elder care support program in Chinatown, and partnered with hospitals to provide financial assistance for families struggling with medical debt. Each initiative was carefully chosen, each one addressing problems Margot had witnessed firsthand during her years at Sacred Heart. She was using the fortune exactly as her grandmother and Sarah Mitchell had hoped, amplifying good that was already in her heart. But success brought new challenges. The foundation needed its staff, office space, professional management. Marot found herself learning non-profit administration on the fly, making decisions about things she'd never considered. David Liu suggested hiring an executive director, someone with experience who could handle the operational complexities, while Margot focused on strategic vision. The suggestion was practical, but it meant trusting someone new with the foundation's mission. Moreau interviewed dozens of candidates before finding Rachel Kwan, a former hospital administrator who had burned out on corporate healthcare, but still wanted to help people. Rachel understood the foundation's purpose instinctively. During her interview, she spoke about her own grandmother, an immigrant from Korea who had cleaned houses to send Rachel to college. "This isn't just work to me," Rachel explained. "It's honoring the women who built opportunities for us to have choices. That's what the Helen Chen Foundation represents." Margot hired her immediately. Within weeks, Rachel had transformed the foundation's operations. She hired a small staff, established proper procedures, and created systems that allowed them to evaluate grant applications efficiently. Margot remained the face and the vision, but Rachel made that vision operational. 6 months after the foundation's announcement, David and Jessica requested a meeting. They arrived at the foundation's new office in a converted loft in the Mission District. Clearly surprised by the professional setup, Margot met them in the conference room, Rachel sitting beside her for support. "Thank you for coming," Margot began neutrally. "What did you want to discuss?" David exchanged glances with Jessica before speaking. "We've been talking about grandmother's wishes about the family." He seemed to be choosing words carefully. "We realize we've been hostile and that wasn't fair." The apology was clearly scripted, probably advised by David's lawyer. Margot waited for the inevitable ask. "The thing is," David continued, "grandmother obviously trusted you with this money for a reason, and we should respect that. We do respect that. So, what we're proposing is a partnership." Jessica leaned forward, suddenly enthusiastic. "The three of us working together on the foundation. David and I both have business expertise that could help. We want to contribute to be part of grandmother's legacy." The offer was almost insulting in its transparency. Having failed to claim the money legally, they were attempting to worm their way into control of the foundation. Margot glanced at Rachel, who gave a slight supportive nod. "I appreciate the offer," Margot said carefully, "but the foundation already has the expertise it needs. Rachel here is a former hospital administrator with extensive non-profit experience. Our board includes healthcare professionals, community leaders, and financial advisors. We're well positioned to fulfill grandmother's vision." David's expression hardened. "We're family, Margot. Doesn't that mean something?" "Of course it does," Margot agreed. "Which is why I hope you'll support the foundation's work without needing formal roles. There are many ways to honor grandmother's memory." Jessica stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. You're shutting us out of something that should be a family legacy." "It is a family legacy," Margot responded calmly. "Grandmother's legacy. And I'm honoring her wishes by focusing on the cause, not on family politics." The meeting ended badly with threats to badmouth the foundation publicly and warnings that Moreau was making enemies she couldn't afford. After they left, Rachel turned to Margot with concern. "Will they really try to sabotage the foundation?" "Probably," Margot admitted. "But the foundation's work speaks for itself. As long as we maintain integrity and transparency, their complaints will just look like jealousy." She was right. David and Jessica did try, posting on social media about family betrayal and questionable inheritance, but their efforts generated more support for the foundation than damage. The narrative of the generous nurse versus the bitter siblings played exactly as Margot's team hoped. A year after discovering the money, the Helen Chen Foundation celebrated its first anniversary with a gala benefit at a hotel in downtown San Francisco. Margot stood at the podium in an elegant dress, looking out at a ballroom full of donors, healthcare professionals, and community leaders. The event had raised an additional $3 million to support the foundation's expanding programs. She spoke about her grandmother, about Helen Chen's quiet dignity and generous spirit. She spoke about Sarah Mitchell, carefully framed as a donor who had supported Helen's vision. She spoke about the responsibility that comes with unexpected fortune. My grandmother left me more than money. Margot concluded, she left me an example of how to live with integrity, how to give without seeking recognition, how to find joy in helping others. The Helen Chen Foundation isn't my legacy, it's hers, and I'm grateful every day for the trust she placed in me. The ballroom erupted in applause. Margot stepped down from the podium and was immediately surrounded by well-wishers. Among them was a woman in her late 60s with kind eyes and a warm smile. She approached Margot with the confidence of someone who belonged, but the humility of someone who didn't need recognition. "Miss Chen," the woman said softly, "may I have a moment?" They stepped to a quieter corner of the ballroom. "I'm Sarah Mitchell," the woman said simply. "Well, I was Sarah Mitchell. I've been someone else for a very long time now." Margot stared in shock at the woman whose letter she'd read a year ago. Sarah smiled at her expression. "I know," I said. "I disappeared completely. But I've been following the Foundation's work from afar. What you've created, it's beyond anything I hoped for when I entrusted that money to your grandmother." "But why reveal yourself now?" Margot asked. Sarah's eyes were gentle. "Because I wanted to thank you. I gave up a fortune to find freedom. You've taken that same fortune and transformed it into something that frees others. That's alchemy of the highest order." They talked for over an hour, Sarah sharing stories about her life after her disappearance. She'd taught English in small villages across Southeast Asia. She'd worked in orphanages in Eastern Europe. She'd lived simply, anonymously, finally experiencing life without the weight of wealth. "And you never regretted it?" Margot asked. "Giving up everything?" "Never," Sarah said firmly. "The fortune was a prison. Walking away from it gave me the life I actually wanted." She gestured around the ballroom. "But seeing it used like this, helping so many people, this gives me peace. Knowing that my father's money is doing good instead of just sitting in vaults somewhere." Before Sarah left, she pressed something into Margot's hand, a small key. "This opens a storage unit in Oakland. Inside you'll find my personal journals from the years before I disappeared. The full story of why I left, what I experienced, what I learned. I think you should have them. You're the only person who would understand." Margot held the key, feeling its weight. "Why are you giving me this?" Sarah's smile was sad and knowing, because someday when the Foundation is established and running smoothly, you might need to be reminded why you started. Money has a way of corrupting even the best intentions. These journals are my testimony, my warning, my hope. Use them wisely. Sarah disappeared back into the crowd before Margot could respond. When Margot looked for her later, she was gone, vanished as thoroughly as she had 30 years earlier. The gala ended in triumph. The Foundation had exceeded all fundraising goals. Moreau returned to her apartment, still the same small studio she'd lived in before everything changed. She'd looked at bigger places, but found she didn't want to move. This space held memories of her grandmother, of the moment everything shifted. On the table beside the Singer sewing machine sat Sarah's key. Moreau would visit the storage unit soon, but tonight she wanted to simply sit with the weight of the year that had passed. She'd transformed from invisible to influential, from dismissed to respected, from powerless to powerful, but the core of who she was hadn't changed. She was still Margot Chen, the granddaughter who had loved an immigrant seamstress, still the nurse who cared about helping people, still someone who understood that wealth measured in dollars was meaningless compared to wealth measured in impact. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Saw the news coverage of the gala. You were amazing. So proud of my friend." Margot smiled and texted back a simple thank you, then turned off her phone. The city lights sparkled through her window. Somewhere out there, her siblings were probably still bitter, still scheming, still unable to accept that their quiet sister had inherited something extraordinary. Somewhere out there, Sarah Mitchell was living her chosen life, finally free from her father's fortune. And somewhere in Chinatown, the building her grandmother had owned for decades stood as a testament to an immigrant's determination and sacrifice. Margot approached the Singer sewing machine, running her hand over its familiar surface. The hidden compartment was empty now, its treasure distributed to help thousands of people. But the machine itself remained a physical connection to the two remarkable women who had trusted her with their secrets. She thought about her grandmother's letter, about the instruction to use the money to amplify the good already in her heart. Had she done that? The question was harder to answer than she'd expected. The Foundation helped people. Definitely. Scholarships were changing lives. The free clinic was serving those with nowhere else to go. Elder care programs were providing dignity and support. But had Margot herself grown, or had she just become another wealthy person managing charity from a distance? The question troubled her as she prepared for bed. Wealth had insulated her from many problems, but created new ones. She no longer worried about rent or student loans. but she worried about staff management, donor relations, public perception. The nature of her concerns had changed, but they hadn't necessarily decreased. Over the following months, Margot made a conscious decision to stay connected to the work's actual impact. She volunteered at the free clinic, 1 day a week, providing direct patient care alongside staff she'd hired. She attended nursing school graduations to personally award scholarships. She visited elder care centers to understand what was working and what needed improvement. Her hands-on approach was unusual for someone of her wealth. Most foundation directors operated at a strategic distance, leaving implementation to staff. But Margot remembered her grandmother's callous hands, the physical reality of work done well. She didn't want to lose that connection. Rachel supported this approach while ensuring Marot didn't burn out. "You can't do everything yourself," she reminded Marot gently. "Part of leading is trusting others to execute your vision." The balance was delicate. Stay involved enough to remain authentic, but delegate enough to be effective. Marot navigated it imperfectly, making mistakes and learning from them. 18 months after establishing the foundation, David reached out again. This time his approach was different, less demanding, more genuine. "Can we talk?" "Just you and me. No lawyers, no agenda." They met at a quiet cafe in Pacific Heights. Neutral territory for both. David looked older, tired. His car dealerships were struggling in the changing economy. "I've been an ass," he said without preamble. "To you about grandmother, about everything." The admission surprised Margot into silence. "I was so sure I deserved more," David continued, staring into his coffee. "The oldest son, the one who stayed in business. I couldn't accept that grandmother saw something in you that she valued more than my accomplishments." Margot waited, sensing he needed to say this without interruption. "The thing is, I've been watching what you've done with the foundation, the lives you've changed, and I realized grandmother was right. You were the right person for this. I would have just hoarded it or invested it or used it to make more money. You actually made it matter." The words cost him something. Margot could see that. "I'm not asking for anything," David added quickly. "I just wanted you to know I'm sorry and I'm proud of you, even if I never said it before." They talked for 2 hours, more honestly than they had in years. David shared his financial struggles, his failing marriage, his growing realization that the markers of success he'd chased had left him empty. Margot listened without judgment, recognizing echoes of what Sarah Mitchell must have felt. Before they parted, David hugged her awkwardly. "Take care of yourself, okay? Don't let the money consume you the way it consumed me." The reconciliation with Jessica took longer. She remained bitter, publicly disparaging the foundation when opportunities arose. But eventually, even her anger cooled into resigned acceptance. Margot was succeeding on a scale Jessica couldn't diminish, and continued attacks only made Jessica look petty. 2 years after discovering the fortune, Margot finally visited the storage unit Sarah had left her the key for. Inside was a single banker's box containing dozens of journals spanning from Sarah's teenage years through her final days before disappearing. Margot spent weeks reading them. Sarah's words painted a picture of wealth as a burden she'd never wanted. From childhood, people had valued her for her father money rather than herself. Friends used her for access. Teachers gave her unearned praise. Romantic interests saw inheritance rather than person. When Sarah's father died and the fortune became officially hers, the pressure intensified. Advisors pushed aggressive investment strategies. Charities begged for donations. Distant relatives appeared with sob stories. Everyone wanted something. The journals detailed Sarah's growing desperation, her realization that she couldn't live authentically while carrying the burden of billions. The planned disappearance was meticulously documented. New identity established, cash hidden in small accounts worldwide, the staged car near Golden Gate Bridge, her escape to Asia, and the early years of freedom. But it was the later entries that affected Margot most deeply. Sarah's reflections on watching from a distance as Helen Chen guarded the fortune, her gratitude for Helen's quiet integrity, her hope that eventually the money would find someone who could transform burden into blessing. The last entry was dated 6 months before Helen's death. "Today I learned that Helen has cancer. She won't live much longer. I wanted to come see her to thank her in person for these decades of trust. But revealing myself would undo everything we worked for. So I'll remain hidden and pray that she chose her heir wisely. The fortune will pass to someone new soon. I hope they understand what a profound responsibility wealth is. I hope they use it better than I ever could. I hope they find freedom in giving rather than having." Margot closed the journal with tears on her cheeks. She understood now what Sarah and her grandmother had known. The money wasn't a gift. The freedom to choose how to use it. That was the gift. And with that freedom came responsibility to honor the trust that had been placed in her. The Helen Chen Foundation continued growing. By its 3rd anniversary, it had distributed over $40 million to healthcare causes across California. Nursing programs, free clinics, elder care, addiction treatment. each initiative carefully chosen and managed for maximum impact. Margot had evolved from overwhelmed inheritor to confident philanthropist. She'd learned to delegate effectively, to trust her team, to think strategically about long-term sustainability. The foundation would continue its work long after her lifetime, a permanent legacy to her grandmother's values. But she'd also learned what Sarah Mitchell discovered, that wealth changes how people see you, not always for the better. Moreau was no longer invisible. She was powerful, influential, respected, feared. People wanted things from her now. Access, money, endorsements, connections. The difference was that Margot had chosen this visibility for a purpose. She wasn't trapped by wealth like Sarah had been. She was wielding it as a tool to accomplish specific goals. On the 3rd anniversary of discovering the fortune, Margot hosted a small private gathering at the foundation office. Just Rachel and a few key staff members. No donors, no press, no spectacle. They stood around the old Singer sewing machine, which Margot had brought to the office as the foundation symbol. 3 years ago, Margot said, "I inherited this sewing machine and thought I'd been forgotten by my family. Instead, I'd been chosen for something more important than I could have imagined." She placed her hand on the Singer's smooth surface. My grandmother and Sarah Mitchell both understood something crucial. Wealth isn't about having, it's about doing, about transforming resources into impact, about amplifying good that already exists. Rachel raised her glass to Helen Chen and to the granddaughter, who honored her legacy perfectly. They toasted quietly, a moment of reflection before returning to the endless work of managing a growing foundation. That evening, Margot returned to her small apartment. She'd finally decided to move to something larger, a modest house in the Sunset District, with a garden where she could grow vegetables like her grandmother had. But tonight was her last night in this space where everything had changed. She sat beside the window looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Sarah Mitchell was living her chosen life of freedom. Somewhere in Chinatown, the building her grandmother had owned was now a community center that David had finally donated after his business struggles forced him to sell. And here, in this small apartment, Margot Chen had transformed from invisible to unforgettable. Not because of wealth, but because of how she'd chosen to use it. Her phone showed a message from Marcus. The proposal had been a long time coming. They'd grown closer over the years. Friendship deepening into something more. Margot smiled and texted back, "Yes, some things were worth having, not just using." She approached the Singer one last time in this apartment. Tomorrow it would move to her new house. Tonight it stood sentinel over the space where a fortune had been discovered and a life had been transformed. Margot ran her fingers over the hidden panel release. Though the compartment was long since empty, the mechanism still worked perfectly. A secret that only mattered if you knew where to look. Her grandmother had known she would look carefully. Sarah Mitchell had trusted that she would use what she found wisely. And Margot had honored both women by transforming burden into blessing, turning an ending into a beginning. In the morning, movers would come, a new chapter would start. But tonight, in the quiet of her soon-to-be former apartment, Margot sat beside the machine that had held a fortune and whispered a simple thank you to the two remarkable women who had trusted her with more than money. They had trusted her with choice, and she had chosen well. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next.